Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Paul Elam with a Voice for Men, and I am joined as always by the inimitable Janice Fiamengo of the Fiamengo Files and Tom Golden of MenAreGood.com, a good friend for a long time. I actually wasn't freezing on saying your name. I do know it. I just wanted to give that appearance. Anyway, today we're talking about an article in the National Post, one of Canada's only conservative-leaning publications, and how they survive in the frozen lands up north, I have no idea, but they are still alive and kicking. And there is an article there currently by a Peter Sean Taylor on basically a comparison of life circumstances for men and women. Who's doing better, who's doing worse? And guys, the answers aren't good for men. But that is part of the story too, because it is very unusual for any gender-based article in modern media to compare how the sexes are doing and come up that women are doing better than men. But yet he did it. I do have one quick bone to pick about the article, and that he said, and I quote here, the zombie factoid from Feminist Heaven, but while there's no denying the facts on disparities in earnings and executive appointments, they don't tell the whole story. Well, neither did that line. Of course, we know for a fact that there are many explanations of why there is an earnings gap between men and women, why there are more men have made executive appointments than women, has to do with lifestyle choices. I don't want to dedicate the whole conversation to that here, but I think if we're really getting fair here about this article, we're going to have to say that of the 8 alleged points where men have done worse than women, and I think it was really 7 with women doing better with the stuff I just listed. I think it actually turns out that men are doing worse in all areas. But that's a matter of debate. But I'll go ahead and throw this out for discussion. I know that Tom and Janice have been much more studious about the OECD or OCD. The OECD, I believe, some acronym for something I don't care about.
Yeah.
But let's talk about this. Were either of you shocked by the fact that somebody actually published an article saying men had it worse?
I was, yeah, I was really surprised, and good on this fellow, Peter Sean Taylor. If you're out there listening, thank you so much for doing this. I don't think Peter Sean Taylor is a men's issues advocate of any sort. If I'm correct, I didn't know him. I'm sorry, I didn't know his name before this, but I did a little bit of research into the kinds of articles that he normally writes. He's an economics guy. I think he has a degree in economics, and that's what he normally writes about. And that's very interesting, but not my area. He talks about the boondoggle of green energy and the problem of carbon tax, which we're being levied with in Canada, and the need for affordable energy, especially living in the Great White North as we do. And those are sort of his bread and butter issues. So this is a guy that's plugged into numbers. He's a serious sort of guy. He's not an ideologue at all. I don't think he writes for both right-leaning and more kind of progressive journals. I'm not even sure that the National Post can be said to be a right-leaning paper anymore. It started out that way, but it's got a pretty healthy dose of progressivism now. It's a center paper, I guess. He writes for a variety of journals, Maclean's magazine, which also I think used to be conservative, but now is kind of left wing. And anyway, but this is the first article where he waded into men's issues. So I want to commend him for that, and hope he hasn't got too much negative response for daring to say that when you look at the figures, men are not doing very well. And I also admire his courage in not following the rule book or the playbook. whenever a man talks about any men's issues, which is that the man must pay obeisance to at the altar of gynocentrism, and must first genuflect before the evident fact that women suffer so much from the male gaze and being catcalled and constant sexual harassment and the risk of being raped from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed and everything else. He doesn't talk about those things. And in fact, he begins rather aggressively and says, with International Women's Day over for another year, as we know, that's March the 8th. So he was writing this the week after Women's Week. He says, with International Women's Day over for another year, perhaps now we can have an informed discussion about some gender inequities that really ought to matter to Canadians. There's a lot conveyed in that. There's a dismissiveness about the total focus on women that we always hear. There's a skepticism about whether those so-called gendered disparities are real or not. And there's an aggressive awareness that Canadian society really doesn't care about men at all or talk about men's issues with the seriousness they deserve. So I commend him for that.
Yeah, I do too.
And Tom, you have looked into the actual OECD report in a lot more, with a lot more care than I think both Paul and I did. I found it incomprehensible, so many graphs and all of this. But I was surprised he could actually find what he found.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
I commend him for his diligence in reading through that typically gynocentric report, and knowing what to look for, and knowing how to interpret it.
Because the whole report is built in such a way that it hides men's disadvantages. And I'll show you a couple of charts in just a second that show you exactly what I'm talking about. But first off, I love this guy for doing this. I mean, a clear article written about men and their disadvantages. I mean, what's not to like about that?
Yeah,
but what impressed me the most was that this guy somehow read through this OECD report and got what he got. I mean, that's pretty amazing when you look at the actual report, which was geared really to hide men's issues. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. Let's see if we can see if I can share this screen. You can see what we're saying here. There was this, can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah, this is from a video that the OECD put out about gender equality and their report. And here we see a chart that talks about women's and men's equality, right? And the pink ones show signs where men are doing better. This is literally what this woman says. She says, these are areas where men are doing better. Longer hours of unpaid work. Okay. Employment rate, earnings. And by the way, the line in the middle there is one. That's equality, is like right in the middle. So all of men's are like right up next to that one line, right? But then you look at where women are doing better. This is where it gets crazy. They say women are doing better because they're not homicide victims as much as men. Mm-hmm. Women are doing better because the deaths from suicide, alcohol, and drugs are not as much as men. It's like, it's a crazy way to say men are disadvantaged. Mm-hmm. They're saying women have it better because they're not having it like men, rather than saying men have it really freaking bad. And then the very next, she said, well, we'll talk about one area, which is these deaths of despair, and all of these deaths of despair in different countries is what that little chart says. And then if you look at the little bottom right, this is her little quote at the end. While on average, 4 times more men than women die from these causes, the number of women falling victim to deaths of despair has risen in over 1/3 of OECD countries since 2010.
Isn't that a classic?
So it's like, every time you see anything in this report about men's disadvantages, you can bet your bottom dollar there's going to be a comma and but after that. But women, it's like, and you see it over and over again. And they have this, it's really a complicated setup where you can literally make charts of the data you see. But making charts of men compared to women is very, very tricky. Oh, God. I was never able to do it. I made a couple of charts, but man, they make it so the data really can't be.
It reminds me of the large public relations campaign that went on to raise awareness about women's homelessness by reminding everybody in America that 1 out of 4 of homeless were women.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And it's just another way to frame the situation, which makes women victims and men simply don't count.
Yeah.
And that's what this report does over and over and over again.
And this notion that somehow being a homicide victim or being more likely to kill oneself or die of a drug overdose or be homeless indeed, that is somehow equates to the disadvantage of doing unpaid labor. I mean, I just love that phrase, which essentially means that in some cases a woman is being supported by a man to care for their children and to look after their home.
Well, I think it's worse than that,
She
Janice.
gets food, clothing, medical care, a roof over her head. In other words, payment.
Payment, yes. Tell me how that is not paid.
And I searched far and wide for what variables they used in unpaid work, because I'm sure that it was cleaning the kitchen.
Oh, sure.
Cleaning the living room.
Yeah, putting a pot roast on.
It wasn't fixing the car. It wasn't scraping out the gutters. It wasn't all the things that men do. It was only the things that women do. And so they could say, oh, women have so much more unpaid work, 25 minutes a day more. Yeah. It's like, that's what they came up with, was this 25 minutes a day more.
Farrell really dispelled that notion way back in The Myth of Male Power.
Yes.
When he calculated the amount of work that men do that is unpaid.
Yes.
Working on cars, doing heavy lifting, all kinds of things that men put into homes that is totally disregarded in all these studies that characterize women's work as being unpaid when it's not.
Including bodyguard.
Yes.
Of course. Yes. When you hear a sound downstairs in the middle of the night, who goes down and investigates it? It's almost never the woman. And even, I looked at a study a few years ago that came out just targeting unpaid labor. Again, of course, claiming that men do far less. And I mean, I don't even know how they do these studies. I'm sure, I assume that it means that men and women fill out surveys or answer questions about how much time they spend doing various things. And this one did purportedly include outdoor work, like shoveling snow and that kind of thing. But there are just so many variables, so many gender disparities, if we want to use that phrase. I mean, which would you rather do? Shovel the driveway for half an hour when it has just snowed extremely heavily? Or would you want to spend an hour and a half catching a bit of one of your favorite YouTube topics while you have got the pot roast on and while you're looking after, minding your child, which, you would mark down as that would be an hour and a half of labor, supposedly, because you're cooking and that. And the guy's only done a half an hour, where he's been exerting himself to the nth degree and, risking a heart attack or a back strain or something, or a hernia. They're not even comparable. And most women would far prefer to do the work inside the house. Many men would like to do that work.
They don't have the choice, though.
They don't have the choice. They're the ones usually that they're going out and doing the tough stuff outside when it's freezing out and the car needs to be repaired so that it'll start or whatever it happens to be. So yeah, I mean, all of these things are slanted in order to somehow convey the picture that men have it so easy and that they're living off the backs of women. It's quite remarkable. And so I guess that's why Peter Sean Taylor in this article gives the emphasis that he gives, which is, okay, even if we accept some of these kinds of statements of gender disparities, let's look at what it means that men work these longer hours and are paid more in these higher stress jobs and bear the burden of that stress. And as he points out, live shorter lives partly as a result because they have stress-induced illnesses. And so I guess that's why he ends up with, in that final paragraph, with a statement that I actually found pretty problematic, but I think he was responding to all this emphasis on what is so-called privileged about men's experiences. He says, what we can say for sure is that compared to women, men work too hard, are more likely to die young and violently, don't get as much social time, and often feel excluded from government. So he's sort of summing up there the main points that he focused on in the rest of the article and that were there in the OECD data. So I don't blame him for that. And it does present us with an alternative picture of what male privilege looks like. But as soon as I saw that, men work too hard, I thought, that's an interesting way of putting it.
Yep.
And I can see why he puts it that way. There's a case for that argument for sure, but it's also really problematic. It kind of slides into that toxic masculinity sort of discourse that feminists, of course, have been pushing on us. You know, work too hard according to whose standards?
And so what are we... Janice.
Yeah, it's their fault. You know, what are we actually advocating here? And I can see, yeah, you know, I can see the case. I know, I mean, Steve Brule has told me, for example, about the men in his life, many of whom he feels have been forced into positions where they have jobs they don't particularly like. The decisions about where they live, what kind of home they have, are mostly made by their wives, who either don't work or work part-time. And the husbands in these cases end up driving very long hours just to get to work. They work long, stressful jobs. They come home at night, you know, they don't get home till late. All they have time to do is eat their dinner and fall into bed exhausted. The weekends are taken up mostly with chores and catching up on sleep. And, you know, and he sees them as work slaves, really, and you know, that's horrible. But on the other side, I think of somebody like my dad, who worked incredibly hard all his life up to 3 weeks before he died, and loved to work. My mom would have loved it if he had quit, and he could have done so financially, you know, decades before. She would have loved it if he'd lounged around the house and they went out on walks and, you know, went on cruises and all sorts of things. He loved to work. That's how he defined himself. It was the source of his greatest, most consistent life satisfaction. You know, I have so many fond memories. He was on all sorts of boards of directors and things, and he was a commercial fisherman. I have all sorts of fond memories of my dad sitting, reading the board kits that they used to send out before they'd have their meetings, reading every page. I mean, he loved doing things meticulously and conscientiously and being the best at everything he did, not out of competition, but because that was just who he was. And so if somebody had said to him, look, you work too hard, like, it wouldn't have meant anything.
Would have laughed.
Yeah, it would have just shrugged his shoulders.
And that I really believe is a real important part of this story that is much worthy of exploration. There is somewhat of a conclusion in the article here, and I'm just taking this line from it that says, a better measure of life, we are told, should focus on what makes people truly happy. Well, that is really good in a fantasy world. It's a wonderful way, but here's the thing. Men operate in a hierarchy. We do, and it's based on effort and status. That is the reality of men's existence. We can like it or not like it. Feminists are very fond of saying that patriarchy hurts men too. They have it wrong. Hierarchy hurts men too. The price of hierarchy is an elevated suicide rate. It is burnout at work. It's stress-related diseases. The other side of hierarchy is curing cancer and landing on the moon,
well said.
and creating the finest of art in world history, and one accomplishment and great civilizational advance after another is the other part of hierarchy. And I think that men, generally speaking, want to adopt a feminist style mentality of, oh, we recognize we're working too hard and we need to work less. I don't want any part of that. Right. I think that's insane.
Yep.
And it's insane for society to adopt an attitude of men working less. This is our lot. It's not always pretty. Again, early death, suicide, alcoholism, depression, all these problems come from the pressure of being placed by worth of your status in the hierarchy. And on the other hand, without those things, we are living in ditches and grass huts.
Yep.
And so this whole idea, as much, and I want to compliment Taylor for this article. I really do. I think it showed a remarkable amount of guts, if anything else.
Yes.
Just to come out and attack the feminist narrative with such logic and precision. But at the same time, I'm very, very wary of a men's movement that would adopt the idea that we recognize that men face these hardships and that the answer is to be more like women. I don't want any part of a movement that would advocate that.
With you on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, you know, the notion that somehow if men just, I mean, I just don't, that's not my sense of men. You guys, of course, could speak to this much more directly than I can. But when I hear from men, I do not hear men saying, I'm really mad because I know that my sex is more likely to die earlier. I'm really mad because I don't have as much social time as women have. You know, I'm really mad because I, give so much to my job. I just don't, that's not the issue. And
right.
I mean, what I hear from men is, I'm horrified that we have passed laws that make it that my children can be taken away from me. I'm mad when I look and see that there is a prison gap and that there's a massive gap in criminal sentencing. I'm really mad that that men don't get credit from society. I mean, it's not just that men don't feel that government reflects their views. It's that they're told constantly that they should apologize and that they need to change and that they're toxic and they're a danger and they should just go away and let women take over. I mean, there's so many more significant real injustices in our society and in societies around the world. And so, and they, obviously the OECD doesn't take those into account. And so Peter Sean Taylor couldn't talk about them. But, this is not like, I just think actually these issues are in many ways beside the point.
I agree, totally.
Yeah, interesting.
And this is what we see often with people that have just tested the waters of men's issues. They get some of the basics, but they're not really getting the ultimate conclusions quite correct yet.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that was the thing that disturbed me about the Red Pill movie too. I mean, a wonderful, wonderful movie, and nothing against Cassie J or any of the people who spoke in it. Obviously, yours truly was one of the wonderful speakers, but there was a tinge of that idea. Men are victims too. We're all victims of gender stereotypes. And, if somehow we could throw off these gender stereotypes, everything would be fine. But things are so much more complicated than that. And the issues that men are rightly concerned about I don't think they boil down to gender stereotypes or indeed to the very real problems that Peter Sean Taylor is targeting here. There's a much larger problem and much deeper injustices that aren't even reported here. So, and I think, just having that recognized, feeling valued by one society, I mean, that's one of the things that's changed over history. Men always did the most dangerous work in the world. Men always died on the job, died in wars, etc., at rates not comparable to women. But men's contribution to the world was once recognized. At least there was respect for what men brought to society, which we don't have now at all. It's totally denied. And so I think that's a bigger problem that we face now than the fact that men, give themselves too much to their jobs and carry the strain of that. Because I just don't see that changing. I can't imagine even what that would look like.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's it. That's the necessary discussion, though, because anytime you start acknowledging problems, you run into the potential for victimhood. Just to simply recognize this stuff, you run into the tendency, and the political climate is such now that the whole idea of addressing issues is to politicize them and to play victim and to gain power that way,
Yeah.
which is a form of power that men will never enjoy in human species. It's just not possible. We're not wired for that
Exactly.
as an animal.
Right.
I agree with you, Janice. I mean, it is a dilemma that you get too close to the issues and it can start sounding like we need to have men work less, and we need to make sure that they live exactly as long as women do. That, I think that's a wrong road to go down. I really do. I just think
Very
all
wrong.
we really need is quit sticking knives in our backs while we're doing our jobs, and we'll be
Really? Start admiring what men are doing, for crying out
Exactly.
loud.
So let's start loving men and admiring
Really?
them. And I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm not, I want men to have choices, obviously, and some men may well say, I didn't want a life where I was a wage slave. I never wanted that, and it ruined my life. I wasted my life working at a job I hated, and the stress it put on me was intolerable. And that is a real issue. But yeah, to simply say that all men must change, and we're again going to have some sort of top-down feminist compliant idea of what equality should look like, and that's going to solve all issues, is foolishness.
Can you love men for who they are?
That's it.
If you look at it's interesting, the longevity thing. If you look at animal populations, they're competers or choosers, right? This is broken down into two groups. One of the, either male or female, is the competitor. They compete for the reproductive access with the other sex. And the other is the chooser. They choose which one to mate with. And in animal populations, almost always, the competitor has a shorter lifespan. And so it's not a surprise that men would have a shorter lifespan, because men are basically the competers in our culture, in the same way that animals might be in theirs. It's quite different, but there's some similarities there. And it's to be expected. Men probably will always live a shorter lifespan as long as we're a part of that hierarchy. I mean, that's just the way it's going to work. And
go ahead, Tom. Sorry.
No, you go ahead, man.
Oh, and I don't think there's anything wrong with men questioning some things like, do I want to be in a competition to die for my country?
Yeah, really.
Or die for corporate interests, which is how a lot of men die, which
Yes.
is just as corrupt as it can be. And am I going to accept the bribe of a piece of ribbon and a piece of tin in exchange for my life? I think that in looking at ourselves again, a second look, that we can really afford to take a very close look at that sort of mentality and have men be reluctant to just put their neck on the chopping block for no apparent reason. Other than a fake reward of heroics or something like that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Ben, if we ever really encourage men to quit working, oh my God, are we in trouble?
Exactly.
In trouble. I wouldn't want to live in that world.
Yeah. Do we imagine that things are just going to go on, and we're going to have all the social programs that we have, and the incredible productivity that we have, and the ability to cure diseases, etc.? Wow. Are we really, really willing to give that up over some sort of feminist utopia where gender roles melt away?
Because when you turn on the air conditioning fairy pushes cool air.
Yeah. So it is a very complex issue.
Yes.
More complex even than, that Peter Sean Taylor has been able to tease out of this OECD data, and thanks to him for doing it. But I feel that a lot of these things, it would be just nice if we could discuss them in a way that wasn't full of animus towards men and full of suspicion towards them, that did express love and concern and asked men over and over again what they want and how they see things working out for them better. And have the kind of open-hearted empathy for that women can expect when they express their concerns.
Yeah, if people can just respect and admire men, we'll be in a whole lot better place.
That's for sure.
You know?
And speaking of that, there's a link below to this article by Mr. Taylor. They're taking comments there. Go in there and leave some love for it.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
And we'll also leave links for the that video that I talked about that has the charts that we saw.
That's
and also
amazing.
the OECD report itself.
Mm-hmm.
It is amazing.
Yeah.
It is amazing. That's how bad we've gotten.
Yeah.
Crazy,
Okay.
crazy. Are
Well.
we finished?
Hey, well, we almost came to a happy ending here. Something must be wrong. I'm sensing this is a little upbeat. We got to start over.
So we should assert that.
And men
are
good.
Indeed, they are.
See you guys next time.
All right.
Have a great week.
See you for the next one.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.